Scene 1 unfolds as a quiet but emotionally charged introduction to a household in transition, using small, almost mundane moments to reveal the deeper fractures that form when women are forced to renegotiate space, belonging, and care under the weight of change. And through a queer, emotionally grounded lens, the scene resonates as a study in invisibility and longing rather than conflict alone. Joelle washing up in the bathroom and then running through the house wrapped in a towel immediately situates her as exposed and vulnerable. Not in a sensational way, but in the deeply human sense of being caught between private need and public scrutiny. A feeling many queer women recognize from moments when they are physically present yet emotionally unaccounted for. The bathroom, traditionally a space of solitude and self-regulation, becomes a threshold rather than a refuge, and Joelle's hurried movement underscores her awareness that she does not yet belong. That she must move quickly, quietly, and apologetically, in a home that is not fully hers. Rachael and Katie's conversation while getting dressed unfolds without Joelle's participation, reinforcing this sense of exclusion, as Rachael gently asks for patience and Katie articulates her resentment at being forced into a new family structure without consent, voicing a grief that is raw and unprocessed. Katie's frustration over her mother remarrying and playing housewife and new mommy reflects a common experience for daughters and queer women alike, the fear that their emotional needs are secondary to the performance of domestic normalcy, and that their discomfort will be dismissed as selfish or immature. Joelle, watching from the shadows, is a powerful visual metaphor for queerness itself, especially in domestic spaces where acceptance is conditional. She is there, listening, absorbing, but not invited to speak, her silence mistaken for absence. When she runs off and is later confronted by Katie, the confrontation is less about the bathroom than about territorial fear, and Katie's sharp insistence that Joelle must learn to share or leave altogether exposes how quickly empathy can collapse when someone feels displaced. Katie's suggestion that Joelle could go live in the streets if she doesn't like it there is cruel, but it is also revealing, echoing real-world threats queer people have historically faced when families fracture or reform without room for them, and highlighting how easily safety can feel conditional for those already marginalized. Joelle's response is not defiance but retreat, and her retreat into tears is not weakness but a natural response to being rendered disposable, a moment that many women will recognize from times when they were told, implicitly or explicitly, that their needs were inconvenient. Rachael's arrival to talk with Joelle marks a tonal shift in the scene, offering not a solution but a pause, and through her, the film introduces the possibility of care that does not demand immediate assimilation or cheerfulness. Rachael's belief that Joelle and Katie could get along if they truly knew each other reframes conflict as misalignment rather than incompatibility, an important distinction in queer storytelling that resists the idea that tension between women must be rooted in jealousy or competition. More importantly, Rachael's willingness to listen to Joelle, to name her struggle, and to call her brave for asking for help centers emotional honesty as an act of courage, particularly for women who are often socialized to minimize their distress to keep the peace. For queer audiences, this moment resonates deeply, as it reflects the exhaustion of constantly adjusting oneself to fit environments that promise inclusion but deliver uncertainty, and the relief that comes when someone finally acknowledges the labor involved in simply existing. The scene also subtly challenges society's discomfort with seeing women express complex emotions toward one another. By refusing to flatten the interactions into villain and victim, Katie's anger, Joelle's hurt, and Rachael's compassion coexist without being resolved, mirroring real-life dynamics where healing is gradual and uneven. Rather than framing women's emotional intensity as irrational or excessive, the scene validates it as a response to loss, fear, and change, pushing back against cultural narratives that prefer women to be agreeable and resilient without support. Symbolically, each woman occupies a distinct emotional role. Joelle embodies vulnerability and the longing to be seen, Katie represents unacknowledged grief and resistance to impose normalcy, and Rachael serves as a bridge, modeling what it looks like to offer care without erasing conflict. Their interaction mirrors the pressures queer women face to justify their presence, to shrink themselves to avoid disruption, and to accept scraps of reassurance instead of full belonging. By centering quiet conversations and emotional fallout rather than spectacle, the scene invites viewers, especially women and LGBTQ+ audiences, to recognize their own experiences of displacement, hope, and tentative connection, affirming that visibility begins not with grand declarations but with being met in one's pain and told sincerely that needing help is not a failure but a form of self-respect. Scene 2 deepens the film's emotional arc by transforming initial resistance into tentative curiosity, showing how connection between women often begins not with grand gestures but with awkward pauses, half-formed apologies, and the courage to stay present when retreat feels safer. Joelle approaching Katie is an act of vulnerability rather than entitlement, and Katie's immediate disinterest reflects not cruelty but exhaustion, the fatigue of being asked to adapt to changes she never chose. a feeling many queer women recognize from family restructurings that prioritize appearances over emotional consent. When Katie stands to leave, the power dynamic is clear. She controls the exit, guarding herself through distance, while Joelle's apology lands without immediate reward, reinforcing how often sincerity is met with silence rather than reconciliation. The later moment when Joelle asks Katie to hang out marks a subtle shift, because the invitation is not framed as obligation or forced bonding, but as an option, allowing Katie agency in deciding whether proximity is possible. Her reluctant agreement signals curiosity beneath resentment, and as small talk unfolds, the film wisely lets common ground emerge organically through shared interests and casual laughter, rather than dramatic confessions, mirroring how real intimacy grows through mundane discovery. Their conversation about dating becomes a pivotal hinge, especially as Joelle's gentle, almost absent-minded playing with Katie's hair introduces touch as communication, not escalation. A quiet language of attention that many queer viewers will recognize as familiar and charged precisely because it is understated. Katie's admission that she is not dating anyone, paired with her dismissal of the boys around her as bad kissers, is delivered with humor, yet it carries an undercurrent of dissatisfaction, suggesting that heterosexual scripts have failed to resonate even if she has never fully questioned why. When Katie asks Joelle about kissing girls before college, the question is less interrogation than permission-seeking, a way to approach desire sideways without naming it outright, reflecting how women often test emotional safety before allowing themselves honesty. Joelle's confirmation, followed by her admission that she has done more than just kiss, is handled without spectacle, positioning experience not as superiority but as openness, an offering rather than a challenge. The slow, passionate burn that follows is rooted in trust rather than urgency, built through sustained eye contact, steady presence, and the reaffirming gesture of Joelle's hand in Katie's hair, which becomes a grounding anchor rather than a provocative one. Their kiss is meaningful not because it breaks a rule, but because it dissolves a wall, allowing both women to step briefly outside the roles assigned to them within the household. For lesbian audiences, this moment resonates as a reflection of first recognitions that feel simultaneously inevitable and terrifying. While for women more broadly, it speaks to the longing to be met without judgment, to be seen as complex rather than contradictory. Society's discomfort with scenes like this persists because they refuse to frame women's intimacy as either experimental play or moral transgression, instead presenting it as an authentic response to emotional alignment. The film challenges that discomfort by grounding desire in conversation, consent, and care, dismantling the myth that intimacy between women must be sensationalized to be legible. Symbolically, Joelle represents self-knowledge tempered by patience, someone who understands her own desires but does not rush another into naming theirs, while Katie embodies the confusion of awakening, the push and pull between inherited expectations and felt truth. Their interaction mirrors real-world pressures on queer women to minimize their feelings, to justify attraction as curiosity, or to hide it behind humor. Yet the scene gently insists that acknowledgement is not dangerous but freeing. By allowing tenderness to coexist with uncertainty, the film affirms that becoming visible is not a single revelation but a series of small choices to stay, listen, and lean closer, offering viewers not fantasy but a deeply recognizable portrait of connection beginning. It also subtly reframes conflict as a necessary prelude to understanding, reminding viewers that harmony achieved without honesty is fragile, and that disagreement can be the doorway through which deeper empathy enters. In refusing to punish either woman for her feelings, the scene validates the messiness of growth, particularly for young women navigating identity in shared spaces where privacy is scarce and expectations are loud. What lingers is not the kiss itself but the calm that follows, the sense that something unnamed has finally been allowed to exist, and that allowance becomes an act of resistance against cultures that ask women to stay quiet about what they want. This is how beginnings often look: uncertain, gentle, and brave. It invites audiences to remember that visibility is built slowly, through trust and listening, until two people realize they are no longer alone inside the same room. Together, they choose presence over fear.